Well, welcome to the CHEK Blog, everybody. I'm excited. I'm going to start off with a comic book story because that's how I like to do it. When I was growing up, one of my favorite comics was Marvel Team Up. And every month, Marvel Team Up had Spider-Man and some other hero like Doctor Strange or The Thing or somebody like that. They would solve a crime or something like that. So today, we have the CHEK Institute's version of Marvel Team Up. I don't know who's Spider-Man here. Maybe you guys can fight over it. But I'm really excited to have both Jator and Warren back with us for another CHEK Team Up to talk on the blog. We did this a few months ago when we talked about video games. That was great. And I'm sorry we had to wait so long to reunite these two guys. But today we're going to talk about fear in a broad way, I guess. Warren, this was kind of your topic, so maybe you can tell us kind of what you were thinking about here.
Yeah, and with the Marvel team up, I'd probably be Wolverine as opposed to Spider-Man, FYI.
Wait, no, we gotta get out. Okay, Jator, who are you? Just so that everybody can kind of identify.
I mean, the Hulk, but I guess, I'm a small guy, so I guess maybe I'm like a mix of Bruce and the Hulk before they completely transform.
Okay, I don't know, there's been tons of Hulks, so maybe you're one of those. Like
yeah. Dr. Grey.
I'll be Professor Hulk. That's
it,
team up.
Professor Hulk. Yes. That's
awesome. Great, sorry to interrupt, Warren, but
yes.
Yeah.
So, initially, I spoke to yourself, James, a little while ago, just because, I was just talking about this tipping point that we were talking about off camera, this tipping point of humanity where, I remember another CHEK practitioner was saying that, things have gotten so bad, but it's gonna keep getting bad until it gets to a tipping point. That the yang becomes the yin and the yin becomes the yang. When we look at the world, so I was just thinking about it, when we look at the world, you look at the state of the world, how most people are, when you talk to most people in the Western world, they're unhappy about something, they have fear about something, they're stressed about something. When you look at the animal kingdom and what's going on in the animal kingdom, when we look at the politicians and people like President Trump and just all of these things are a magnification of what's going on with the planet. And we get into this tipping point. You look at Alaska, all these things that are happening on the planet. I was kind of wanting this talk to kind of be about the overview of what needs to change and what's causing the problems and the issues in the world in the first place.
Yeah, so that's really fascinating to me. In part because, I think one of the things that we try to do at the Institute, and I think what practitioners try to do is find some positive ways for their clients to change, right? To help clients sort of extricate themselves from the negativity. And so this is really fascinating to me. Do you, Jator, have the same sense of kind of fear in your clients and fear in the world?
It's a great question. I typically don't engage in many kind of outlets of information. So I feel probably slightly naive on this topic, at least from a fear perspective. Me personally, no. At least not that I'm aware of. I guess why that is, maybe, is because my perspective is that everything that's happening on this planet, whether it's political, whether it's environmental, whether it's the human condition, for me, all of those things are extremely necessary and are a part of how the world expresses itself, and that there are going to be at times expressions on this planet that don't meet or match our ego's desires and what we think is wrong or right. So we look at something like a miracle. Why is something usually a miracle? Well, it's usually a miracle because it matches people's ideas of what they want and desire. So a big ship crashes and, everyone survives except for one person. That's a miracle. But if it was the opposite way around, everyone died except for one, it would be a tragedy. And really the difference between those two is just our perception of reality and what reality is presenting to us. And we get to choose whether that's a miracle or a tragedy for us. So from my perspective, everything that's going on feels necessary. And like we were saying off camera, Warren was talking about the yin and the yang. And for me, when we look at planetary history, when we look at current science on how many times this has happened on the planet, there's been global deaths 5 times through at least through science that we can look at. And I think I won't be so popular on this podcast because my perspective is human beings tend to have a sense of arrogance about them because we think we're conscious or we have consciousness, and we kind of separate ourselves out from everything else in the universe. And I think that's a very arrogant standpoint because when we look at those planet deaths that have happened here simply on Earth, it has happened 5 times. One reason Earth creates so much diversity in life, inclusive of us, is so that when that happens again, something survives for the next process to occur. So I think life and death is a completely normal part of the cycle. And I also think for us to learn, if we stay here as human beings, for us to learn how to do things differently, we actually have to go to the SHIT storm of it all to learn what the consequences are of treating ourselves and the planet this way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's like you said, it's the perception and also the consequence. And it's like when Paul talks often about the pain teacher, and oftentimes people think the pain teacher is bad, but the pain teacher arrives to teach you a lesson. And if that lesson forces you to make a better change in your life, then it's great. So maybe this is a global pain teacher giving life a lesson, giving humanity a lesson to actually realize that the consequences of their actions are creating the problems that we have in the planet. We could sit here and spend hours talking about all the travesties that are, on the planet. Teenage mothers that are abandoning their children dying in cars, tsunamis, mobile phone technology creating cancers and all these sort of things. But the reality of it is all these things are a manifestation of what we put out as people, the way we think, the way we breathe, the way we do. And the universe and the planet is just expressing, as Jator said, it's just expressing our own actions back to us. It's like the mirror reflecting our perception of truth back to us so we can see it as reality. And that's where we're at right now.
But let me try to make the problem worse. Because that's what we need, right? I guess, what I imagine is probably Jator is a little atypical in the way that you don't interact with the news. But for the average Joe, right, who does read, I was going to say read the newspaper, but that's not the average Joe anymore, right? For the average person who watches the news or reads their blogs or whatever, what they do read is about, global warming or terrorism or violence or, the fact that in the United States, wages have been stagnant since the 1970s or, right? And these sorts of stories, what we know is that they sell blogs, right? Or they get clicks, people watch them. So for some reason, we really want to hear about and watch the negative, but then we end up kind of marinating in it, right? So then you start to feel this sense of hopelessness because, well, gosh, look, I've got to save for my retirement and I got to make sure my kids get into a good college. And there's gun violence and global warming and, on and on and on and on. And at some point you can wonder if you just sit down and throw up your hands and, maybe it doesn't, what is this all about anyway?
Yeah. I was going to share something quickly on that. I know Jator's going to have something fantastic to say about this in a moment anyway, about what you just said. no pressure.
Oh, shit.
But just done that. when you were talking about watching the news, I remember I was listening to a guy talking about the news, and he said, he said, don't watch the news. Honestly, don't watch the news because all they do is celebrate the bad. And whenever you watch enough bad things, like you said, you get to a state of hopelessness. As we know, anxiety is fear about the future. So it's like if you're constantly in this state of anxiety, then you're always worried about the future. You're in a state of worry. That's fear, and fear leads to control. So, a lot of the powers that be, when we look at the people, the puppeteers, the powers that be are basically putting out all this negative information because it allows them to allow us to be controlled by our fears. And a fearful society is an easily controlled society. When you look at all of the riots that go on in the world, oh my gosh, I'm not safe in my home. I'm going to stay inside. That creates some form of fear because now you're in a panic state or in a weakened state. You're disempowered. And, a lot of this commercialism is there to allow us to become disempowered to the point where it's easy, where our minds become kind of sedentary and like sheep. We follow whatever allows us to think we are safe. If that means eating commercial food or voting for President Trump or whatever it is, it's all fear and it's all control. And that's one of the reasons why people are watching car crash TV.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jator, what's your awesome response here?
Well, first I wanted to celebrate Warren's response and your response. Those are deep thoughts, and also because we all agree it must be right, of course. Man, you guys said so much. So many cool things came up for me, at least. And one of the things that came up for me, maybe more so from a practical perspective, is, information is very interesting because there's so many outlets and there's so many ways to find information now. And because most of that information is to get clicks and to get attention, most of it's over aggrandized, essentially. It's made very bright and shiny, so people click on it. We all know this very clearly about nutrition, right? Coconut oil will kill you. So that's like everybody's now arguing, a couple months ago, arguing about coconut oil again. And the interesting thing about that, from my perspective, is that there's so much science out there as well. And my experience, back to something that I'm going to project onto Warren, is I don't know Warren well, but what I've heard about Warren is that he's a martial artist. And something that I know in my experience about martial art is it's another form of active meditation. So my guess is that as Warren is doing martial art and learning about his inner world and his outer world and his body, he's also becoming more responsive and less reactive with his decision-making process. And I think at the root of what we're all saying here is that many of us are extremely reactive when we read something or hear something or see something or we're told something. It's an immediate response of that's the truth, that's what's going on, and we go into, like Warren was saying, into this fear state, which then accentuates, Warren was saying, the anxiety and then that projection into the future and all of the what ifs, and that then becomes this nonlinear cycle of just feeding itself. So for me, what's so important about that is an easy way for us, myself, and what I help clients learn to help themselves with is learning some form of focus towards self, whether that's meditation, whether that's rock stacking, whether that's martial arts, whether that's playing ice hockey and making that into your meditative practice. Somewhere where you learn to slow down and respond, become responsive rather than overly reactive. I don't want to make reaction bad, because if I put my hand on a hot stove, I want to be able to react and take it off. However, when it comes to information that's pouring at me at all times, in all ways, at such a high rate, I do want to slow down and start to ask these questions about, okay, well, where is this information coming from? How well vetted is this? Where can I find other perspectives? And that in and of itself because we're in this not reactive and not in the sympathetic state, we become more open and expansive because we're parasympathetic, and we can actually consider perspective and slow down and not be in our mind of doing what we've always done.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a good thing, tying it into, what you do with clients and stuff as well, because, we know that with stress, it's all perceptive anyway. And, there's two different, one of the things we always talk about is two different types of stress. There's the situational stress that we speak about, which is situations in our lives that, we're upset about or fearful about, which is kind of what we're talking about with today's topic. It's the situational stress stuff. And then there's physiological stress, which is body-wide stress from eating bad food or overtraining or not getting enough sleep or whatever. But like Jator said, it all comes down to this perception. So we know there's bad information or bad news coming out, projecting to us constantly. As me and James have spoken about before on another blog, about this whole idea of Facebook depression, where people wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is check how many likes they got. And if they didn't get any, they get depressed. So there's oversaturation of information, where people are trying to find a way to numb themselves from the truth of what they see in the world based on their perception. But, adding to what Jator said about this whole reactive stage, we first of all, we have to see something, which is seeing the news or seeing death or whatever. First of all, we have to see it. And then once we see it through our perception, we choose to react to it in a specific way. And it's typically based on fear of that event. I hope it doesn't happen to me, because most of the time when people see something, it's always relating to them. I hope that doesn't happen to me or someone I love. So we react to it. The most damaging part of it is how we internalize it. That's third stage, which is most important. So we see it, we react to it, and then we internalize it. And when we internalize it, it goes into our body and creates that cascade of physiological stress, and it lives within us. And then when we're walking down the road, we're hoping that these events don't happen. If we see a car crash or something like that, we hope that it's not our family member. We hope that the car's not near us. Or if we watch a horror film, we go to sleep and we see a bump in the night. We hope that it's the guy in the film. So we bring all this reality into our minds that then cascades into our body physiologically, and then it affects the way we interact with people, because now we walk through life in a stage of fear, holding our breath in case something happens. You got those TV programs now with the doomsday preppers, which is, I know, quite popular in America, where people are prepping for the end of the world. So if you're prepping for the end, then where's the beginning? Because you're already prepping for the end and you can't live life. So this whole see it perception, react to it perception, is kind of the thing that's holding us back. So I suppose what we're saying right now is you can't control, you can control what you see on the TV, just don't watch it. And, for myself, I don't watch the news, but we know it's out there. So what can we do? One of the things we can do is, like Jator said, we have to start rationalizing things in our own minds, not ignoring them, but rationalizing them. And we can only do that, like Jator said, was slow everything down, get into meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong. One of the things I always say is I don't have to study mechanics. I don't have to study accountancy. I don't have to study, working with horses or whatever. But everyone on the planet, regardless of the work that they do, everyone should be doing some form of meditation, some form of Tai Chi, some form of Qigong. If they're not working in field, it makes no difference, because that's what we need in life to be able to get through the state that we're in right now.
Something I'd really like to share is, Warren, the thought of you riding a horse sounds amazing. I'd pay to see that.
I'd pay to see it too.
But to draft off your wisdom, brother, something that came up for me while you were speaking is, this idea of fear and this idea of the sympathetic state and internalizing, and really interesting that comes up for me as a potential, another reason of why it's so kind of widespread, is because there's essentially right now in society, there is a mismatch between our physiology and the environment. And that alone causes us to be in this stress state for most of us, unless we're doing caveats, etc., 6 principles for doctors to learn how to mitigate those things. And if those things aren't in place, then most people, in my experience, are walking around very fatigued, very tired, very low energy. Said in another way, their HPA axis is dysregulated. What's really interesting about that, though, is that if you're really fatigued and tired, there's a few ways to get sparks of life internally: cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And one of those ways is to actually expose yourself to fearful thoughts or fearful news, because it sparks you. It sparks you with those hormones and neurotransmitters, so you actually feel alive. You actually feel like you can get things done. So for me, it's another reason why people are so attracted to negativity or negative news, is because it helps them feel a sense of awakeness, aliveness, and maybe even connection. We think about arguments at home. We think about arguments at work. What if part of the underlying thread of why that's kind of going up and up, or even the expression of violence maybe it's going up, I don't know, James may have different numbers on that, is because people are so tired. They're looking for ways to enliven themselves with the sympathetic system. That, for me, is a pretty interesting perspective.
Yeah. I completely agree. And actually, to sort of follow up, the numbers about at least violence in the United States is, violent crimes are the lowest they've been in about 30 years. But I think it connects well to what you're saying, because we say, or Paul says, right, that fear is false evidence appearing real, right? And that if you're watching the news and what you hear every day is stories about, a shooting or a robbery or whatever, then you start to believe that we live in a very violent world. And so then you have that perspective, that fear. And at the same time, like you said, whether it's true that violent crime is up or not, if I watch the news every day and I get riled up about it, well then, like you said, I get some stimulation. I feel like I'm alive in some way or another. And if it happens to be some kind of political event, then I can rail against it and feel connection with other members of, with whom I identify, right? So then I can go on Facebook and I can say, oh, did you see what so-and-so did? And they can all say, yeah, that was terrible. And then I've got this, right, the same kind of sense of being alive and a sense of community that's, probably not particularly substantive, but it gives me something that I'm not getting elsewhere in my life.
I paused because I'm waiting for Jator to because obviously that was your point, so I'm letting you add into it.
It brings up this very interesting story that I'll try to keep very quick. So here in California, in Richmond, Richmond, if you don't know, typically in the nation is typically one of the top 3 in terms of murder rate. With Oakland, Richmond, and I think Detroit are typically the top 3. So about 3 years ago, we got a new police chief here in Richmond. And he came on and he was thinking, why is murder rate here so high? We're going to really dive into this. And this really fascinates me. So he hired some people to find out what's happening with all these murders. It turns out that they boiled all the murders down in Richmond to basically 17 people committing most of the crime. This is where it gets fascinating for me, is that once they found those 17 people, they actually did not arrest them or punish them. They created programs for them to earn money and points through showing up at schools, taking their kids to different places, getting a job, getting a license. For each thing that they did in society, they got points, and the points was money so that they could live their lives. Since doing that, murder rate in Richmond has dropped dramatically. It's not even top 3 anymore. And that wasn't about crime and punishment. That was about crime and understanding and having compassion to change the system. And many people will hear that like, well, these people are murderers, but that is the old way of thinking of like, we have to now punish these people. It's a very different way to think about, wait, what if we learn to understand these people? And back to this thing that, something that's part of CHEK philosophy is the coin drill. And I'm just going to use the coin for a second, which is if you're stuck and closed-minded to one side of the coin, you're going to have to defend that side and you can't consider the other side of the coin. And what if we all spent a little bit more time in the middle of the coin rather than on either side?
Yeah. Something I wanted to kind of share with, again, like what you said, there was so much in there. I was actually writing some notes because I wanted to make sure I do certain points that I remembered to kind of share with relation to what you're saying. I'm going to share, I know we've got stories now. I'm going to share a story I heard. So this motivational speaker was talking about this lady, this black lady whose son was murdered by a white man. And he got like a ridiculously low amount of years, maybe 4 years in jail for the murder. And at the end of his arraignment, the mother of the murdered child went up to the man and said, "I promise you, I'm gonna kill you." And then he was like, "Okay." And then anyway, so this white man, he went to jail. And I think after about a year, like none of his own family members sent him mail or anything or visited him. And then the mother of the murdered child started visiting this white guy in jail, and she started sending him letters, not hateful stuff, just like as if she was his family. And anyway, she visited him all the time, and then eventually, when he was about to be released, she went there and said, "Look, when you get released, I'm going to be there." And at this time, you're thinking, well, she's going to be there to kill him. And so, she went there when he was being released, and she said, "Do you have anywhere to live?" And he said, "No, my family have kind of disowned me." And she goes, "No, you're going to live with me." So anyway, he lived with her. And for the next few years, she basically helped him out with everything. She basically was like a surrogate mother to him. And then one day she turned around to him and she said, "Do you remember what I told you when you were at your arraignment? Remember I said I was going to kill you?" And then he was kind of scared and he was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I did. I killed the person you were, because now you're a changed man. I killed the man who killed my son." And that was just, which you didn't think it was going to go there, but it's a beautiful story, and it kind of ties into your point about, educating people and trying to understand the person and try to make them move past their pain. Because something else I wanted to say, which relates to what you were saying earlier, Jator, is, a lot of, when we study, when we look at the stats on rape, we find that a lot of the rapists knew the people that they were raping, they were familiar with them. And then also studies have shown with people that have been bullied, most people that have been bullied end up bullying others. So it's pain. So it's like they want to express that pain onto somebody else. I want someone to feel what I felt. So when we look at the planet, when we look at the world, when we look at all these bad things that are happening, then maybe all this fear is precipitating into more fear because more people are doing what they fear to others. And it's just exasperating the problem. So if we all just sat down and started to learn, as Jator said, like understand the science of our brains, understand the importance of stillness and nature and perception, we wouldn't reflect the fear that we have through hurting others because we are trying to avoid our own pain. So we put pain into others. Maybe we wouldn't have these men that like to beat on their wives, and we wouldn't have all these pedophiles and all sorts of stuff, because they are simply expressing pain that they felt outwardly to somebody else, and that makes the planet globally get worse.
Yeah, and man, that's beautiful. For me, it's beautiful. And also I think something else that produces more of the pain is actually the punishment. It's almost like the thought of punishment for a lot of people actually drives the desire to do it. And that's a really interesting thought. And it's really interesting to consider if we learn to, like you were saying, Warren, if we learn to, essentially what I heard you say, if we learn to notice that what we're seeing in others and that what we see in the world is a literal reflection of aspects of self. Do I want to continue to treat myself with pain, shame, guilt, blame, criticism? Or do I want to start to treat myself with more kindness, understanding, and compassion to learn what's going on, to help myself? And then we can start to project that outwardly onto others to learn what is going on at the root. How can we help you help yourself to change, and what happened to you? It's a very, very different way of thinking about it. And because it's so different, and because it's so polar opposite to the way I've experienced the planet to run, with this idea of crime and punishment, back to what Paul talks a lot about, religion, and this idea of if you do this crime or if you do this sin, there's going to be this God that punishes you. What if the God that's punishing you is internal? And it's one reason why, so much of this happens is that we're actually seeing in the outside world a part of self that is doing something similar, maybe not the literal same expression, maybe more symbolically somewhere else in our lives. And we're so judgmental and critical of self that to help us feel self-righteous, we punish the people that we see outside doing a similar act.
Yeah, because what's the difference between God and a policeman, or God and corporations that are running the world? Because it's the same thing. It's either someone up in the clouds or someone up in an office. And they're both going to punish you. So how do you avoid that? You avoid it by punishing others, because you're being punished. You must then punish others to make yourself feel good about the punishment you received. Because, you don't change Hulk by caging him. You engage him and you rationalize him, and that's why in all these films, Beauty and the Beast. What's the one with the big ape guy?
King Kong.
King Kong.
They always are caged, and King Kong is symbolic of rage and anger being kind of caged, and that's where it's, because that's what happens with King Kong in the films. He's always caged, or Dracula's always put in a coffin. It's always this powerful element of our rage and our anger caged, but yet in those films they always show the love element, and it's always the love element that soothes. So when Paul talks about the 4 doctors and about the 10 steps, we're always focusing on the love. What's your one love? If you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. Well, most people are in a crisis, but they haven't gotten to the point of a crisis of self, where they can get to the stage of self-awareness and self-reflection to realize that the life that they're living, the choices that they're making, are creating the problems that they're trying to avoid in the first place. So maybe if we get to the stage of understanding, like Jator said, get to this point of just using love to conquer all, and to love self first, and then if you can love self, then you can love other, then it doesn't really matter what you see in the news, because you just think, it's all love. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and I want to focus in on something, because I think a lot of people, not Warren, use that word love as this idea of like love just means it's all kindness and beauty. For us, at least, I'm going to project onto Warren and maybe onto James too. What we're saying from a love perspective is everything that is here is love. It's just your ego's perspective that skews it to whether it's good or it's bad, but everything that is here is love, and is purposeful, and is something we can all learn from, to grow from. And I ask myself this question quite frequently, which is, do I learn more from my pain, or do I learn more from my pleasure? And when I think back through my life, I've learned a lot more about myself through pain than I have through pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. It's like what I said to James on one of our calls about one guy is a UFC trainer for fighters, and he wrote a book called You Either Win or You Learn. And, you learn a lot more through the pain, because that's the thing you take. Pain has such a powerful polarity that you actually take notice of it. But pleasure is something that, you watch a good film, that was good, and you get on with your day. But you have pain, that stays with you. So it has more of a lasting, lingering effect. It has this powerful polarity that it can actually change you. One of the things I always say to people when it comes to how powerful pain is when it comes to physical stuff. I always say to them, all right, everybody has their own gait or the way they walk. It's unique to them. You can see a guy that you know half a mile down the road and you can't really see him clearly, but you know who it is because you know how he walks. And I said, imagine that person sprains their ankle. Immediately their gait patterns altered through pain. That's how powerful pain is. So pain can create change. And as Paul always says, pain is the synthesis for change or awareness. So, with the problems we're seeing on this planet, maybe this pain has to be there to force humanity to get to a stage of self-awareness and say, you know what, we need to change because the planet is showing us the ramifications of our choices, our actions, our thoughts, our beliefs. And that's what we're getting with all these problems today, like with religion. Religion spends so much more time focusing on what it doesn't have in common than what it does have in common. Everybody's debating about, no, it's Muhammad, no, it's Jesus, no, it's Abraham. Who cares? It's all love, it's all God anyway. No, it's not God, it's Allah. It's just, relax. We're focused so much on our differences than our connections. So, when we look at this crisis of humanity, a lot of it just comes back to connection through love and finding the connections within self, finding self-love, self-time, self-care, the four doctors, and et cetera, et cetera.
So then let me ask you a question that I did want to ask you, which now I have to sort of scratch my head and kind of try to recall. But, so we were talking about how pain, right, is maybe perhaps the strongest teacher, right? But I think, and we're kind of built that way, right, to avoid pain first, right, because it's an immediate signal that damage is happening, right? So Jator said earlier, we want to have the reaction that when I put my hand on the hot plate, that the pain flares up and I immediately know that's not a good thing, I'm being damaged, and to draw away. And so maybe there's not a lot of sort of perceptual filters that are between me and the cause of my pain in that case. But when you have something much, more murky, like religion, right? My religion can be a source of comfort at times. And sometimes it's hard to see that it could be a source of pain, right? Or it's easy for me to blame other people for my income, right? Blame my parents or whatever. So I can understand that I'm feeling pain, but sometimes it's very difficult to use that pain to trace it back to what is really the source in these sort of big sort of social cases. So how do you, Warren, and you, Jator, when you have a client who is in this kind of existential pain, to use a big word, help them unwind it back to what's really the cause? What is the pain? How do you get them to hear what the pain teacher is saying, really saying? I need to learn how to ask a short question, by the way. I'll work on that for the next one.
Yeah, that was like 10 questions in one. I guess I'm going to be a little laser here. For me, it's pretty simple. The fastest way that I've found to help people find their way out of their pain is to move it out of the literal expression, i.e., not having a job causes me pain. Okay, well, that's a literal story. What does not having a job represent to you? What does it symbolize to you? If we can move ourselves and our clients with us, if they want to go there, out of the literal expression and into symbolism, paradox, and eventually into the creative nature of us as human beings, that is a fast and furious way to move through and understand our pain. As long as we stay in the literal world, you will have to have a tremendous amount of pain, and you will have a very hard time learning to give purpose to your pain, which is one of the fastest ways out of pain.
Yeah, I hear that, and I agree with that. I think another thing for me would be, like, most people are not reacting to any event in their lives. We've spoken about this before. They're always reacting to a label that they create, their own perception. So it's a self-generating program. It becomes so much more to them just because they decided it has to become so much more in their own mind. So when people can separate themselves from their perception of what they think it should mean to them, that pain just doesn't have the same impact. People train themselves into pain to numb themselves from the world, and they make things bigger than it needs to be so they can have something to be concerned about in their lives. But once they can see it for what it is and separate themselves and really look at what it really is that they're complaining about, and they can actually quantify it, they realize, I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, So that's the first thing, is just identifying what's real when it comes to what they're really having an issue about. And also knowing that they can't control everything. I said to you before about how you become invincible by becoming defenseless, just letting go. You can't control everything. All you can control is how you react to things. And then the next thing is, transformation of that pain through not ignorance, but by transforming the actual energy, because all thought is energy. So getting them into Tai Chi, Qigong, it's the same stuff. People are, but it's the same stuff. Tai Chi, Qigong, everything. Yes, it is. Tai Chi, Qigong, breathing. I mean, breathing is so damn important. There's such a big movement today with a lot of these transformational coaches that are doing a lot of breathing work, because we know that your thoughts are reacting in your body as breath. Sometimes you see someone, they're holding their breath. So that's an example of someone who's in some form of emotional stress. When we see a horror film and there's a scene where you go, "Dah!" Everybody holds their breath. So we know emotions tied directly into our breathing. So teaching people to breathe will help to dissipate that pain. And a lot of these breathing movements that are coming out now are actually helping people to move that pain through. So once you've identified the label and realize it's not as big as you think, and you let go of the consequence and understand you can't control it, the second thing is to move that pain out of your cells through some form of energetic practice, whether it's Tai Chi, Qigong, breathing exercises, toning work, affirmations, journaling, and that sort of stuff.
Wow. I'm still, all of that was great, but something you said, Jator, really struck me was that giving purpose to your pain. And that seems really profound to me, because it's true, right? If you don't know why you're in pain, then there's this sense of hopelessness and futility about everything, right? That I just have to live with this thing that I've got forever, and it's a hopeless place to be.
Yeah, for me, it's really important that if you can't learn to give purpose to your pain, then pain will always be in control of you rather than you being in control of it. It's like that old story of the camel and the person who walks the camel representing like the ego and the ego structure. And the camel is the person who's leading, or the ego is who's leading you. Until you learn about your ego and self-awareness, then you can lead the camel. For me, it's the same thing with pain and suffering, is that will always lead you until you learn to give it purpose so you can lead it.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good way of looking at it. And, it's like you said, James, it's really good, like what Jator said about pain and purpose. And it is true because, if you're training, and, just how we think, like if you're training, you go to the gym, people love the pain. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I've got DOMS." They love it because they know there's a purpose to it. I know that if I get DOMS, I trained really hard, or, whatever. I can't do that voice for long. And it's good. I like the way you put that, encapsulated that, pain is purpose, because it's true. Like when someone's training, they expect that pain has a purpose. There's a reason for that pain. I have to be in pain to get better at my athletic craft. And, I like that. So it's a good way, because, it's like I was talking to a client today, and I said, he was talking about a lot of things that he's going through. And I said, what's the lesson? All this crap that you've gone through, what's the lesson? And once you can identify the lesson, then you'll be able to you just start to be able to work through it, because you realize you're in this position because of this. That's the purpose of it. And it's to get you out of this. So I loved, how you encapsulated that, Jator.
Yeah. the other thing that came up too is what's really interesting about the fear stuff that we've been chatting about. I think this whole conversation. What's a really interesting kind of way of looking at too is because so many of us are afraid of not being in control and haven't learned that that you're not in control. Haven't learned to kind of incorporate some of that. I am not actually in control of what life's presenting. And if that isn't your perspective and you feel a sense of fear about being out of control, what's really interesting is that you then can create a ton of fear about your life and your reality to feel a sense of control. I.e., my ego can create fear, so I feel in control because I'm creating the fear. So it's a really interesting control drama that a lot of us use to actually feel a sense of control about the external reality, is by creating a lot of fear about it.
And do you find is this oftentimes why people go through self-sabotage, whether it's at work or in relationships or whatever?
Yeah, it's definitely one way self-sabotage shows up is, control dramas, essentially. And control dramas are very paradoxical and typically don't make any logical sense. So they're very hard for us to understand because they're emotionally driven. If I don't feel in control about my life, I might actually create a sense of control through fear, shame, guilt, pain, because those are easy things to control. As an example, I can't make Warren love me. I could try all my seductive moves to to win his heart.
It's a completely different video. That's we're not going to show that one on this. This is a family channel.
But at the end of the day, in my mind, I know immediately I could probably shame him or scare him. That's controllable. So to the ego, that idea of love can be very unpredictable. So a way that a lot of us create a sense of control in our lives is by creating a lot of shame, fear, pain, and guilt, because it's what we feel like we can actually control, and it's very familiar to us.
Yeah, I love that. And I was just going to add to that. I was listening to a podcast recently, and the guy was saying, he was talking about the topic of veganism, and he said the topic was called The Problem with Vegans is a Problem with People. And what he explained was that he said that, there's a lot of vegans that jump on the vegan bandwagon because they don't have anything else, and it's easy. Because he said, like, he was saying that in order for you to become Christian or Jewish or whatever, you may have to do certain things, like you may actually have to pray, you may actually have to go to church or to the synagogue, you have to actively do something, and some people are too damn lazy to do that. So he said, it's the problem with isms in general, but he just used veganism as an example. He said, well, to be a vegan, you actually don't have to do anything hard. You can just say wake up one day and say, I'm a vegan. Right, now I can bash people because they're not. So he wasn't necessarily having to go at veganism, he was having to go at cliques and isms. And he was saying, that's the problem, because people want to be able to bash people so they can have a way to reflect their pain. And that's a control, kind of similar to what you were saying. It's like, I've got a lot of drama in my life, and it's easier for me to focus on my drama than to actually focus on the solution, because the solution actually takes work. But it's a hell of a lot easier to just bash people. It's a hell of a lot easier to be in an abusive relationship, because that's the only one I can ever be familiar with, even though I don't like it. I just love getting back into it because I can moan about it, And like Paul says, people get mileage out of their dysfunction. They love to, moan about the situations because it doesn't take any effort. Just talk about it, and then you're still stuck in it. But at least it gives you purpose, because you can just keep, bitching about the situation, but not actually do the work necessary to get out of it. And again, that's one of the challenges, getting back to what we were talking about with this overview of the cry for humanity. A lot of it comes back to the fact that most of the adults on this planet are children. I always say people are not growing up, they're just getting older. It's just children growing up. but still staying as children. And then their perceptions are skewed because we know that children, as in when we're talking about real children, they have a lot of fear. You know, whenever they see someone, not always, but a lot of times they see someone they don't know, they hug their parents' leg because they're in this fear stage. I don't know that person. And as a child, I know I can't defend myself. So there's a fear element there. But adults are still mimicking that same fear with the whole stuff that we're talking about now.
So to kind of wrap things up, let me ask you both the same question, sort of a practical question. If you were to teach your clients one thing that would help them to kind of be more resilient to or to extract themselves from these kind of fears, what would you teach them?
One thing.
One thing only. You can only teach
I
them
like
one
it.
thing.
I would share with them to consider questioning everything.
That's a good one.
Just open-ended.
That's it. Question everything, including your own thoughts.
Say your question again to me, James, because his answer was so deep. I'm still thinking.
So the question is, if you could only teach your clients one thing to help them be more resilient to these kinds of fears, or to help them get out of these, escape these kinds of fears, what one thing would you teach them?
Well, first of all, I'll teach them not to try to escape, because that's just running away from the problem. But I know what you mean. Yeah, you know, I always, you know, teach my clients that there's only two things you can do with fear. You either, or stress, which is fear anyway, is you either avoid it or you improve your tolerance to it. So, you know, the world is the way it is, and you can't change. You know, one of my mentors said to me years ago, you can't change the world. Most people can't change 3 channels. The best thing you can do is change yourself. And I would teach them to focus on their perception and get them to understand what perception really is, and understand that the labels that they're creating are the problem in the first place. As Paul says, the question is the answer, and the way they question everything in their mind creates the answer, which is creating the fear in the first place. So I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really one thing. It's just raise your vibrational state and change the label.
I like it. Great.
Yeah, love it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both for joining me for this team up. It was every bit as good as any Spider-Man comic I've ever read. So thank you. And just quickly for our audience, if they're joining us for the first time, Warren, how do people get in touch with you? How do they find you on the web if they want to work with you?
So it's warrenwilliamscoaching.com is the website, and info@warrenwilliamscoaching.com.
And Jator, how about you? How do people find you on the web?
Carefully.
Use the Google machine?
Oh, man. WeHLC is my website, and Explore with Jator is my YouTube channel.
Well, thanks, guys, so much for this. This has been fantastic, and I'm going to do my best to get another team up going on here pretty soon, because I think they're great.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks a lot, Warren. I appreciate it, brother.
Thank you both, guys, Jator and James. Hey, JJ!
Yeah.
All right. See you later, everybody.
Later, y'all.